Rafael Bernardo López-Aliaga was born in Lima on February 11, 1961, but his earliest memories are tied to the city of Chiclayo, that warm land in the north of Peru. There was Hacienda Pomalca, a vast sugar cane plantation where his father, Fernando López-Aliaga Boto, served as general manager. Under his supervision, the work of almost 2,000 laborers was organized, men who went deep into the vast sugarcane fields from morning until dusk. It was this job that led the family to settle in Chiclayo. Fernando moved there with his wife, Paula Casorla Tayeri, and their 3 children. Rafael was the youngest. The story between them had begun several years earlier in the classrooms of the Universidad Nacional Mayor de San Marcos, where they were both studying engineering. There they met and discovered that they shared more than just a passion for science, a deep religious faith. That spiritual affinity was one of the pillars on which they decided to build their relationship. Over time, they got married, started a family, and raised their children within that religious tradition. However, for the youngest of them, it would be very difficult to follow that path. During his childhood, Rafael began to experience it, a silent break with that faith that shaped his parents' lives. That distance grew deeper after an event that impacted him in a decisive way. He was 10 years old when a classmate from school passed away. Rafael attended the funeral, and there he witnessed a scene that would be forever etched in his memory. In the middle of the ceremony, the girl's mother broke down in front of everyone. Through tears and heartbreaking screams, she began to blame God for the death. Her daughter's death, cursing his cruelty and the injustice of his designs. It was a shocking, harrowing scene. Her pain was uncontrollable. All of that was fixed in the boy's mind. The screams, the face devastated by loss, the feeling of absolute injustice. That moment profoundly altered his way of understanding religion. For years, he would carry with him a conclusion that seemed obvious to him. God could not exist. Because if he really existed, he wouldn't let this happen. He wouldn't take away a good and innocent girl. What sense could faith have in a world marked by such injustice? How could a supposedly good God allow something like this? Those questions would stay with him for a long time. His faith weakened so much that, when the time came to receive the sacrament of confirmation, he made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He refused to do it. He was the only student in his entire graduating class who decided not to be confirmed, despite his parents' insistence and the pressure from the school environment. Aside from that episode, Rafael maintained a good relationship with his parents and with the school. He attended elementary and secondary school at Colegio San Agustín in Chiclayo and was an active, sociable student, very involved in the school's activities. He played basketball, participated in various school activities, and had a wide circle of friends. During those years, he became a fan of Alianza Lima and got his first nickname. It wasn't because of anything, it was Tomate, you know? Besides school, Tomate had a close group of 7 inseparable friends in his unique neighborhood. His surroundings were shaped by agricultural life, dominated by vast hectares of sugarcane, heavy machinery, and cane trains. On weekends, he spent long hours playing with his friends. Swimming with his brothers, they would throw him into the river, forcing him to figure out how to stay afloat. That's how he learned to swim. It was a happy and simple childhood, marked by games, mischief, and the slow pace of rural life. But without a doubt, the field where he stood out the most was in his studies. From a very young age, he showed remarkable discipline and a great ability to concentrate. According to his classmates, he was the kind of student who frequently raised his hand, questioned concepts, and openly debated with the teachers. His abilities allowed him to maintain the top spot in his class throughout secondary school, from his 1st through 5th years. At the same time, he developed another skill that would become very useful to him over time: mastery of English. Since he was a child, his father got him used to listening to BBC radio broadcasts from London, familiarizing him with the language from a very early age. To this was added his education at the British Institute of Chiclayo. In fact, after finishing high school, he got his first job as an English teacher at his own school, San Agustin. But his true goal had been clear for years, to become an engineer like his parents. Since he was a child, he had been fascinated by the science behind sugarcane milling, by the chemical processes in the boilers, and by the transformations during fermentation and refining. That early curiosity had sparked in him a genuine interest in understanding how the industrial world worked. His father had a lot to do with it. Fernando was a methodical and demanding man, not very tolerant of inactivity. Every time he saw his son idle, he would assign him a responsibility or a specific task within the workings of the estate. The Pamalca estate had operated for many years. The family enjoyed a stable economic situation, a life without luxuries, but also without major upheavals. However, with the arrival of agrarian reform, that reality would change abruptly. Juan Velasco Alvarado's government ordered the expropriation of the estate. That decision hit the family like a sudden blow. From one day to the next, Fernando López-Aliaga's work was thrown into uncertainty. The conditions changed. The administration passed into the hands of the state, and the company was transformed into an agricultural cooperative. Production began to fall drastically. The transition was chaotic. Rafael was still a child when he witnessed how confusion and worry settled into his family. In the midst of that situation, his father made the decision to stay, to continue working as an external technical advisor, and to help reorganize the estate's processes. Over time, he managed to stabilize the situation and production began to recover. Because of that, the same workers who used to see him as a strict boss began to recognize him as a true leader, someone who didn't abandon ship in the middle of the storm. For Rafael, his father was always an inspiring figure, an example of tenacity and hard work. However, events led him to reconsider and to think about his own path. For years, he had thought about following in his father's footsteps by studying chemical engineering, but in the end, he made a different decision. He chose civil engineering and applied to the Pedro Ruiz Gallo National University in Chiclayo, earning first place in the admissions process. The news brought him great joy, but once he started at the university, everything changed. The reality he found was very different from what he had imagined. The context of those years was harsh, precarious, and deeply shaken by political violence. At the beginning of the 1980s, many public universities in Peru began to be infiltrated by terrorist groups. Pedro Ruiz Gallo was no exception. Shining Path planted professors and students with the purpose of expanding its influence through indoctrination and recruitment. The classrooms were transformed into spaces for ideological debate. In the classrooms, Rafael received a political education strongly influenced by Marxist, Leninist, and Maoist currents. The rhetoric was passionate, filled with slogans and promises of social transformation that student López-Aliaga listened to attentively. Those ideas intrigued him, the speeches seemed powerful to him, and the political climate of the time pushed him to participate more and more actively. He began to read the works of major thinkers. He started with Karl Marx, Engels, Hegel, and Nietzsche, exploring philosophical and political concepts that aimed to explain how society and power structures work. That restlessness led him to get involved in university political life. He became a student leader, participated in university assemblies and debates. This attracted the attention of subversive groups who were precisely looking for intelligent young people with leadership skills. During those years, Rafael was tempted on more than one occasion. He was invited to training meetings, spaces where young people were promised the chance to participate in the real change of the country. But in the end, he never took that step. Life was about to present him with much more urgent decisions. When he was close to finishing his degree, Pedro Ruiz Gallo University was hit by an indefinite strike. Classes came to a complete halt. and no one knew when they would resume. Months began to pass, and the frustration kept growing. Actually, it had been building up for some time. The conditions inside the university were extremely precarious. The infrastructure was poor to the point that there weren't even proper bathrooms. Instead, there were makeshift latrines. The university cafeteria didn't offer better conditions either. The menu was so poor and unhealthy that the students themselves had nicknamed it slow death. The general atmosphere didn't help either. The campus walls were covered with ideological slogans. The classrooms had fewer and fewer students, and in the hallways there was a constant sense of tension and fear. With the suspension of classes, everything finally exploded. Rafael then found himself facing a difficult decision: to wait indefinitely for the situation to be resolved or to abandon that path, to start from scratch at another university. In the midst of that uncertainty, he began to pay attention to something that he found very curious. He had noticed that the bakeries in the Chinese community of Chiclayo bought large quantities of powdered sugar. That constant demand caught his interest. It wasn't just any product, but one he knew well. He then remembered that there was a small artisanal mill on the estate. The idea began to take shape. With the knowledge he had acquired and the tools he had at hand, he decided to give it a try. He began to produce powdered sugar by hand, processing the product kilo by kilo. With patience and dedication, the beginnings were not easy. During the first days, no one seemed interested in buying from him. But with persistence, he managed to convince his first customers. That attracted the attention of others, and in a short time, the small business started to operate. Orders began to increase, and Rafael was able to generate his first significant income. Meanwhile, the situation at the university remained unresolved, so he made a decision that would change the course of his life. He decided to transfer to the University of Piura, this time to study industrial engineering. That meant leaving behind Chiclayo, the city where he had grown up, the place where his friends and family were, and where his childhood memories were made. His parents supported the decision. With their support and the money he had managed to save thanks to selling powdered sugar, he packed his things and left for the hot city of Piura, determined to restart his studies and his academic life far from home. When he arrived, he was faced with a shocking reality. That private university was completely different from the one he had left behind. The first thing that caught his attention was the order and cleanliness. Everything seemed to work. Well-maintained facilities, clean spaces, and basic services up and running. The social atmosphere was also different. Fear no longer lingered in the hallways, and the kids seemed happy. They walked calmly, talked to each other, and smiled. Everything seemed radically different, almost the opposite of that chaotic environment he had endured for so many years. There were no terrorist organizations here. It was a university with firmly rooted religious practices that its students seemed to be accustomed to. Rafael watched in puzzlement as many of his classmates and professors immersed themselves in the daily ritual of Mass and the Rosary that seemed to give them an unshakable serenity, a genuine peace which, far from leaving him indifferent, unsettled him. He couldn't quite understand it, but that way of life began to powerfully draw him in. The University of Piura had been founded in 1969 by Saint Josemaria Escrivá de Balaguer, who was also the founder of Opus Dei, that institution of the Catholic Church, focused on achieving holiness within everyday life and ordinary work, integrating faith into all dimensions of existence. That Catholic identity was not implicit in the university, but expressly stated in its statutes. In that new environment, Rafael surrounded himself with people who would decisively shape his inner journey. Through long conversations with priests, professors, and classmates, his inner walls began to come down, and he began to listen, to completely rethink his worldview until he started to believe in God. The most significant moment of this transformation was going to confession again after many years, and then receiving communion. That experience gave him a deep feeling, hard to explain with words, and he would never stray from that path again. Perhaps the teachings he received from his parents kept a latent flame burning, which, when he found himself in the environment of the University of Piura, was rekindled with immediate strength. Rafael López-Aliaga became involved with Opus Dei at the age of 19 in an intimate and gradual process. Despite feeling the call of faith intensely, he never considered the path of priesthood or the seclusion of a convent, but he made a choice that was nearly as decisive. He chose apostolic celibacy, giving up a married life and sexual intimacy, a commitment he claims to have upheld with integrity to this day. Although Opus Dei does not impose this path on its members, it does recognize this vocation. Rafael felt that this was the sacrifice God was asking of him, and with that conviction, he gave himself completely. With that lifestyle, he would no longer have romantic or sexual relationships. Until then, he had led a normal emotional life for someone his age. He experienced romance and had a few girlfriends, even some success with girls during his teenage years. But after feeling that spiritual connection, everything changed. Of course, this renunciation does not extinguish the natural instinct of attraction, nor the ability to admire beauty, but rather shifts them to a different level.
It's like saying to the Virgin Mary, for example, I say to a gorgeous woman, I say to the Virgin Mary, well, you know what? You are more beautiful. Directly to the Virgin Mary. You are more beautiful than this girl.
Along with the commitment to celibacy, voluntary mortification practices were also incorporated into his life. Rafael began to use the cilice, an instrument of faith, generally in the form of a chain or band, with small spikes that are fastened to the thigh or waist, inflicting a sensation of controlled pain, a tangible sacrifice. This traditional practice is taken as a perpetual reminder of Christ's Calvary. Being on the cross is a way to join in his passion, a way to connect with him. Like thousands of believers throughout the centuries, López-Aliaga would adopt this discipline as part of his spiritual routine, keeping it constant almost daily for more than 4 decades up to the present day.
In 1983,
at 22 years old, Rafael completed his studies and obtained a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering. His academic excellence allowed him to finish university in just 4 years, one less than expected, and also graduating at the top of his class, just as he had done in school. After that achievement, he returned to Chiclayo to enter the textile industry. There, he dedicated himself to optimizing production processes by relying on his great command of Atari computers, equipment that was just beginning to arrive in the country. With them, he designed and programmed basic control systems. He began to understand that engineering was not limited to blueprints and structures, but also existed in circuits, in the codes that were beginning to transform modern industry. During those months, he spent long hours in front of those machines, sharpening the intuition and logic typical of a programmer. Shortly after, he joined Banco Vice, an iconic institution in the Peruvian financial system of that time. There, as a young engineer filled with ideas, he began to delve into the complex mechanisms of the banking system. However, it was a job that barely offered him a minimum wage, which led him to seek broader horizons. That's how he arrived at Alicorp, a food and consumer goods company that at the time was undergoing a process of expansion and industrial modernization. It was in that environment where he understood how large corporations operate, the planning of critical lines, and decision-making in highly competitive markets. During his time at Alicorp, Oscar Caipo, then a consultant associated with KPMG, one of the largest professional services firms in the world, noticed his analytical skills and his ability to optimize processes. It was him who suggested he make the leap to Citibank, an opportunity that would mark a turning point in his life. Rafael accepted the challenge. Determined to enhance his education, he enrolled in the MBA with a specialization in finance at Universidad del Pacífico. From then on, his rise was meteoric. He He rose through the ranks in record time until he reached management, leading teams and participating in the modernization of financial management systems during a period of expansion. Everything seemed to be going very well, but just like for thousands of Peruvians, his plans ended up being derailed by the terrible measures of Alan Garcia's government. It was a time when the state intervened in almost every sector. Prices were controlled from the presidential palace, and the value of the currency was rapidly eroding. Hyperinflation reached unimaginable levels, while the country was hit by the height of terrorism. The political and financial chaos scared away foreign investment. Large international companies began to shut down their operations one after another, unable to survive amid uncertainty, state intervention, and corruption. Citibank was no exception. Suddenly, hundreds of professionals who had chosen to build a career in the financial system were left without a future. Many of them chose to emigrate in search of a stable future. Rafael, on the other hand, decided to stay. He saw this collision from a different perspective. He understood that, after all, times of crisis could also become times of great opportunity for those who had the clarity to identify them. And he believed there were several such opportunities. But Peru was hit hard, so he gathered part of the technical team that had accompanied him in recent years and decided to found his own investment bank, convinced that it was possible to create value even in the midst of collapse. The plan consisted of acquiring bankrupt companies, devalued assets, and reviving them by raising capital, as well as advising other companies and investors to achieve the same. It was a high-risk bet given the circumstances, but it worked. Before turning 30, Rafael managed to consolidate his first successful operations and achieve a solvency that allowed him to pursue greater ambitions. During that process, a decisive opportunity arose: the acquisition of a brokerage firm on the verge of bankruptcy. Rafael's firm bought it and renamed it Peruval. Inspired by the Mexican model Mexival, the mission was clear: to advise individuals and corporations in the complex world of investment, facilitating the buying and selling of stocks, bonds, and other instruments on the Lima Stock Exchange. Over the years, the firm built a solid structure. Its operations were reorganized, diversifying and expanding its reach. In a short time, what had started as a brokerage office was transformed. It was transformed into a strategic conglomerate with a presence in key sectors such as real estate, hospitality, and tourism. The 1990s were especially profitable for Rafael López-Aliaga. In a context of structural reforms and privatization processes promoted by the government of Alberto Fujimori, Peru seemed to begin opening its doors to private and foreign investment. After decades of suffocating statism in that context, he and his partners began to identify sectors with high profit potential. One of them was the aviation sector. López-Aliaga played a key role in bringing the Chilean airline LAM, now TAM Airlines, to Peru. The current regulations required that for a foreign airline to operate domestic routes, the majority of the capital had to be Peruvian. So his company, Peruval, provided the necessary capital to make their entry possible. This step transformed the local industry, introducing significantly higher standards and a level of professionalism and service comparable to that of the region. But the arrival of LAM in Peru was no coincidence. López-Aliaga was driving a project that was directly connected to his other businesses. By the mid-90s, Peruval was already exploring opportunities. In the tourism sector in the south of the country, especially in Cusco, they had identified a market there with significant entry barriers, but with exponential profit potential if they managed to control the logistical infrastructure. In 1994, it obtained the concession for important hotels in that city, including an old Spanish monastery, which it transformed into a 5-star hotel. At this point, Rafael was already a millionaire. In the last 10 years had been remarkable. That context of expansion allowed him to meet a person who would become key in his career, a figure who would take him to the next level by train. It was James Sherwood, the legendary American businessman based in the United Kingdom and founder of the Belmont brand, specialized in experiential luxury hospitality. Sherwood was a true visionary who had elevated tourism to the category of. He became world famous in the 1970s when he brought the historic Orient Express train back to life, the same one that inspired the famous writer Agatha Christie to write one of her most celebrated works, Murder on the Orient Express, a memorable novel with an unexpected ending that I highly recommend to anyone who hasn't read it. Since I got a bit off topic, I want to take this opportunity to remind you that if you're enjoying this story and would like to support this channel, the best way to do so is by leaving a like, subscribing, and sharing the video with friends and family. The Orient Express was a train that connected the main cities of Europe, but when James Sherwood acquired it, it was abandoned and rusted. He decided to restore its splendor, gathered the best craftsmen from across the continent, and restored it with extraordinary precision. Every detail, from the woodwork to the porcelain, evoked the elegance of a golden era. From that achievement, Belmont was born, a company whose concept sought to redefine luxury. True luxury lies in the story you live, not in the money you spend. Under that philosophy, Sherwood expanded his brand beyond European borders until he set his sights on Peru, captivated by its mysticism and excited by its enormous potential for high-end tourism. His goal, of course, was Machu Picchu. When he arrived in the country in 1993, he met with several potential partners, but the one who convinced him the most was a young 32-year-old engineer named Rafael, because he presented his tourism expansion projects with a passion that went beyond just financial matters. He didn't just talk about investments and profitability. He described Cusco as a sleeping jewel in tourism, as a vehicle for national pride. This finally convinced him. The meeting went on for hours, and when it ended, the businessman stood up, shook his hand, and said, "Let's do it." That's how a collaboration was born that would mark the beginning of luxury tourism in Peru. Together, they conceived landmark projects. The most important one, without a doubt, began in 1999 when they secured the concession for the country's two main railway networks, the Central and the Southern Southeastern lines. The latter included Peru's most iconic tourist route, Cusco, Ollantaytambo, Aguascalientes. The concession was granted for 30 years to the Ferrocarril Trasandino Consortium, made up of SIA Containers, the company of James Sherwood, and Peru Val, owned by Rafael López-Aliaga. They would take on the responsibility for the railway infrastructure, meaning they had to ensure that the network was kept in optimal condition to support the transit of the trains. And to operate these trains, they jointly created a new company called Peru Rail, responsible for offering different travel categories, from the local train exclusively for Peruvian passengers to tourist services, which started with the Expedition as the most affordable option for foreigners, followed by the Vista Dome and Observatory. Finally, the Hiram Bingham, an ultra-luxury service, considered in global rankings as one of the best trains. Control of the railways extended beyond passenger transport through Peru Rail. The group also established itself as a key logistical artery in the south of the country, taking on the massive transport of mineral concentrates and various industrial supplies. In addition, the routes were not limited to the tourist circuit of Machu Picchu. New proposals emerged, such as the Peru Rail Titicaca, a luxury train designed to directly connect Cusco with
Puno y el Andean Explorer, otro servicio de segmento
routes. Cusco with Peru. In addition, the routes are not touristy Pichu, like luxury Cusco, Peru. At the same time, the group ventured into the hotel sector with an ultra-luxury collection. The Belmont Monasterio and the Palacio Nazarenas redefined the concept of historic lodging, combining heritage with exclusivity. Meanwhile, the Machu Picchu Sanctuary Lodge established itself as the only hotel at the foot of the citadel, and the most expensive in the region for the most basic room. The company's ambition did not stop in Cusco. They expanded with the addition of the luxury resort Rio Sagrado in the Urubamba Valley and the Casitas del Colca in Arequipa. This was followed by the Belmont Miraflores Park facing the Pacific Ocean, the most expensive hotel in Lima. The impact of these projects, especially the railway ones, generated thousands of jobs and revolutions.
Por completo el turismo.
The connection to Machu Picchu depended on a precarious state-run train with limited schedules and infrastructure that could barely support a minimal tourist flow. After the strategic alliance between the companies of López-Aliaga and Sherwood, the sector underwent a structural transformation. In the 1990s, Machu Picchu received only 50,000 visitors a year. In just a few years, that number skyrocketed to 500,000. And after becoming one of the 7 wonders of the world, in 2007 it reached 1.6 million tourists a year. It's undeniable that the privatization in 1999, combined with efficient management, was crucial for this transformation, which also ended up making Rafael López-Aliaga a multimillionaire. However, an important question remains unanswered. How did they manage to obtain these two large and complementary concessions? On one hand, the control of the railway infrastructure through Fatransa. On the other hand, the exclusive operation of the trains through Peru Rail. In this way, the group managed to establish comprehensive control over the route, a de facto monopoly that allowed them to dictate the rules of the sector. During the first decade, the system operated under absolute hegemony. Over time, the tourist segment began to open up to new competitors. Even so, Peru Rail maintained close to 90% of the market share for years, later decreasing to around 70%. However, control of the local train, the service intended exclusively for Peruvian citizens, has remained under its exclusive administration to this day. To begin to understand how these concessions were obtained and the controversy surrounding them, it is necessary to introduce another key player who was always present throughout this entire process. His name is Lorenzo Sousa de Barbieri, a partner of Rafael López-Aliaga from the very beginning. They started out as colleagues and friends at Citibank, then became partners and built a powerful conglomerate. However, that alliance would end up breaking abruptly. What was once a strategic partnership turned into a rivalry. An open rivalry marked by confrontations and multiple lawsuits. Serious accusations arose and episodes of confrontation that even escalated to physical altercations. All-out brawls in the heart of San Isidro. The conflict would end with the dismantling of the offices of Peru Val.
They're criminals, Rafael López-Aliaga. They ruined the company, one of the smartest and hardest workers.
The conflict between Rafael and his partner Lorenzo is tense and long-lasting. So as not to stray from the topic, I will address it in a separate members-only video for this channel. Enjoy Partners but Enemies. The all-out war between López-Aliaga and Lorenzo Sousa, along with lots of other exclusive content by joining this community. In this way, you will also be directly supporting the maintenance and growth of this channel, which is gaining more subscribers, but also more enemies, in the effort to be objective and tell the truth. But well, that's another story too. The main thing to know is that during Rafael López-Aliaga's first presidential campaign in 2021, Lorenzo Sousa revealed an episode that would reopen serious questions. He stated that in the 90s he had a meeting with Alberto Fujimori where his partners James Y. Sherwood and Rafael López-Aliaga himself were also present. This statement directly contradicted the claims of the leader of Renovación Popular.
No, I haven't met him. Yes, directly.
It was, on the surface, one person's word against another's, but the third partner would end up clearing up the doubt. Years earlier, in 2012, James Sherwood published his memoirs in a book titled Orient Express, A Personal Journey, a work that essentially recounts his journey as a businessman and his global expansion. The book consists of 31 chapters, each one dedicated to a key city in his career. Chapter number 22, titled In the Heights of the Andes, is focused on his experiences in Peru. I took the time to download it and review this section, where Sherwood mentions his two partners, Rafael and Lorenzo, several times. In one of the passages, he recounts that it was them who organized a meeting with the then president of Peru, Alberto Fujimori, who was well aware of his career. He also had the opportunity to meet his daughter Keiko, who was the first lady at the time. In the chapter, Sherwood praises Alberto Fujimori's administration, particularly to his role in stabilizing the country's economy, considering the privatization of sectors in crisis as a fundamental part of this process. Sherwood had extensive experience in that field. He had participated in similar processes in Great Britain, where the railway system was one of the last industries to be transferred to the private sector, amid intense debates about its implementation. In the Peruvian case, the concessions were put up for public bidding, structured on the basis of a percentage of the revenues that the operator had to pay to the state. During the first years, that payment could be used for the modernization of the tracks, raising them to American railway standards. As Sherwood mentions, they initially offered to give up 30% to 33% of the revenues from the entire system. However, Lopez and Souza suggested slightly raising the proposal, bringing it to 33.375%. He agreed. That small margin turned out to be decisive in winning the concession, since the main competitor had offered just 0.04% less. From that point, Sherwood hinted at the possibility that Souza and his partners might have known their rival's offer in advance, although he also makes it clear that, if that were the case, they never let him know. Of course, influence peddling, undue favors, and irregular benefits in contracts with the state are illegal. What is not illegal is for businessmen or investors to meet with the president. These meetings are usually part of public administration and economic relations. Souza claims that it was a strictly ceremonial meeting. But then, if that were the case, why did López-Aliaga insist on denying it? Would it be the first time they met? To what extent did this meeting define the course of the concession? The answers are left open to your own conclusions. On several occasions, Rafael López-Aliaga has spoken positively about the achievements of Alberto Fujimori's government, and at the same time he has been very critical of some of his methods. In that context, he claims to have been the target of 2 extortion attempts orchestrated by Vladimiro Montesinos in the late 1990s. The first one was allegedly linked to a project to establish a hydroelectric plant on the Wara River, together with Norwegian investors, an initiative that, according to his testimony, was thwarted due to the demand for large bribes. The second episode allegedly took place around the launch of a project called Destella.com, conceived as the country's first digital financial institution. According to his account, Montesinos allegedly made the granting of operating permits conditional on the payment of $100,000, a demand he decided not to comply with. López-Aliaga has always defended his honesty and transparency. However, these have always been subject to questioning. One of the most critical episodes is related to his tax history. The Sunad has reported the accumulation of unpaid tax obligations in various companies where he appears as a shareholder. Up to 8 companies linked to his holding have been identified with debts that would exceed 28 million sols. However, the most significant case involves Peruval, which has an outstanding debt. Enforced collection of 12.9 million, corresponding to taxes omitted between 2001 and 2006, an amount that has increased exponentially due to accumulated interest. Despite being an enforced collection, the most advanced stage of the administrative enforcement procedure, the recovery of these funds, has been hindered. The company is listed as not located. In other words, Sunad has not been able to locate a valid tax address to carry out measures such as physical seizures, delaying the collection process for years. López-Aliaga claims that this is a political persecution driven by certain caviar factions entrenched in Sunad. He argues that the debts had become time-barred and that the notifications were poorly executed. For its part, the entity maintains that the obligations are fully enforceable. The challenges presented by the businessmen have been systematically rejected in administrative instances, which is why the active collection status remains in effect in the system. Where are they going to pay me?
What am I going to do on the criminal side? You pay the tax and you have the right, when a tax doesn't make sense, is unfair, you have the right to defend yourself.
The empire of López-Aliaga would not stop. In addition to the well-known railway and hotel companies, he decided to conquer different markets in parallel through his holding company. An example of this was Marzano Palace, a company focused on the management, purchase, sale, and leasing of real estate. In addition to the development of commercial projects, such as the construction and commercialization of the Inca Plaza Handicraft Center in Miraflores, a commercial hub dedicated to the sale of handicrafts and textiles. Continuing with the specialized shopping center segment, he also built CompuPalace, the well-known technology and computer sales complex located in the same district. In 2011, he founded Acres Finance, a new financial holding company that quickly established itself in the capital market, specializing in fund management, asset securitization, and debt structuring. In addition, its brokerage segment was authorized by the Superintendency of the Securities Market to operate directly on the Lima Stock Exchange. That same year, 2011, was when Rafael López-Aliaga decided to enter politics. He ran for Congress with National Solidarity, a party led by Luis Castañeda Lotzio, with whom he had already worked before as a councilman. He wouldn't manage to get a seat, but that experience planted an idea in him that over the years would grow stronger and stronger. I will make the leap into politics, but that's another story, a long and complex one, full of speculation, lies, and truths, which I will cover in another video dedicated exclusively to his political career, from the beginning to the present. If a lot of people ask for it in the comments, I promise I'll upload that story soon. If you like this one, please like the video and subscribe. See you in the next one. Goodbye.